Hello and welcome back to Men Behind the Stats. I'm Statman Cam and today we're going to be looking at who can replace Nemanja Matic for Manchester United. So before we delve into the stats, it's really important to know why we need an out-and-out defensive midfielder. So as an example, let's break down Steven Bergwijn's goal for Spurs against Manchester United. Once the ball's got to this position, which is a result of a Luke Shaw mistake trying to head it first time to Rashford instead of bringing it down, what you'll notice is look at where Fred and Scott McTominay are. If Nemanja Matic was playing, the X here is where he would have probably been positioned, maybe a little bit ahead of that. But what that means is that, as you can see from this next arrow, Maguire can go in and press Bergwijn rather than having to hang back. This gives Maguire more momentum going forwards. He can go through Bergwijn to try and win that ball, knowing that if he loses the ball, Matich can cover, as you can see from that dotted arrow, going behind him. So he's got more freedom to go in and win that ball rather than having to be stuck there isolated with space either side of him that Bergwijn can target. Now, if you're a defender and you're not the quickest like Harry Maguire and you're up against a small pacey winger like Steven Bergwijn, a position you really don't want to find yourself in is exactly where Maguire finds himself. You're in the middle with acres of space on both sides, no other covering defenders. You know that if you commit one side, the winger does a body fake and cuts back on the other side or pulls off some skill move, there's going to be a lot of space for that winger to run into and they're through on goal for free. So in that situation, Maguire doesn't want to commit to either side, knowing that if he gets it wrong, Bergwijn's in on goal. So he ends up flat-footed, making it very easy for Bergwijn to just sprint past him. If, however, you've got a proper defensive midfielder who can spot the danger, cover and step into the back line, this is less of a problem because Maguire can go out on the front foot, try and win that ball, knowing that he's got protection and cover behind him. And this is why Manchester United need a proper defensive midfielder rather than just using Fred and Scott McTominay. This is why a proper defensive replacement is needed for Nemanja Matic. Now, let's get into some stats. So first of all, to illustrate the point I've just made a little bit better, if we look at where Harry Maguire is on this graph, it shows how often and how good he is at carrying the ball forward from centre-back. Obviously, when he goes forward, he steps out of the defensive line. So it just illustrates once more why Manchester United need a defensive midfielder to step back into that defensive line and occupy Maguire's position when he goes further forward. Given what we've seen so far, it's quite clear that United need an out-and-out defensive midfielder for this role rather than just a box-to-box player. Now, the two main options that United have been linked with so far are Wilfred and Dee Dee and Declan Rice. Declan Rice hype has gone up another level in the last few weeks with his brilliant performances lately, and rightly so. So now we're going to evaluate both Wilfred and Dee Dee and Declan Rice, and we'll look at who Manchester United would be better off signing to replace Nemanja Matic. So, first of all, I think it's really important for a United defensive midfielder to be able to make line-breaking passes. It's vital that a player who's supporting Pogba and Bruno Fernandes is able to get the ball to them higher up the pitch so that they don't have to drop deeper to dictate play. Having that from a CDM is a massive advantage. It may not seem like it, but it allows Pogba and Bruno to be that much closer, even if it's only 5 yards, 10 yards further up the pitch. If they can consistently be a little bit closer to the opposition's goal, you're going to see a lot better in terms of their attacking output and productivity. So, if you now look at this graph of defensive midfielders in terms of their ball progression, what you can see is that Matich is amongst the best, and also Declan Rice, in terms of his passing, is probably the best in the Premier League in terms of progressive passes from that defensive midfield role. You compare that now to where Wilfred and Ndidi is, and there's really no competition. Ndidi is not as good, nowhere near as good in fact, as any of the rest of the elite defensive midfielders on the ball. Now, for me, this should mean that unless Declan Rice is significantly worse than Wilfred and Ndidi in terms of his defensive work, that Declan Rice is a much better signing for Manchester United in terms of being a good replacement for Nemanja Matic, who ideally complements Paul Pogba and Bruno Fernandes. So if we now look at defensive actions, I've possession adjusted them to take into account the fact that certain teams have more possession and therefore less opportunity to defend, so that we've removed the effect of that as far as possible. So if we now look at this graph here, I've made Rice and Matic a little bit bigger so they're quite obvious. What you can see is that Declan Rice makes slightly more defensive actions per 90 minutes than Nemanja Matic, but he gets dribbled past a fair amount more as well. It's really important that this defensive midfielder for United isn't getting dribbled past too much. And the reason for that is that if Pogba and Fernandes are high up the pitch, there's not going to be enough support if that player gets dribbled past regularly. And what you can see is that Rice obviously gets dribbled past more than Matich, but not too much. Do take note of Fernandinho in the 18-19 season. This is why he was such a key part of Manchester City storming the title in that season. He got dribbled past so rarely from that defensive midfield position and was putting in so many defensive actions that he was just a monster on the defensive transition, meaning that City very, very rarely got counter-attacked on in a way that the opposition would realistically be able to score from it. In other words, Fernandinho was able to largely stop the opposition counter-attacking through the middle against Manchester City. This is what United need from their defensive midfielder also. So in that sense, Declan Rice once again is a much better option than Wilfred and Dee Dee. Rice does make far fewer defensive actions than Wilfred and Dee Dee, but that suggests that in fact he stays in his position more, whereas Wilfred and Dee Dee likes to charge out of position, go and press the opposition, but that leaves gaps in behind. And when you're playing with Pogba and Bruno Fernandes, who aren't the best defensively, you can't afford to do that. You need a defensive midfielder that is intelligent enough to stay in the middle of the pitch, hold position, put out fires and be where the problems are going to come. That is what Fred and Scott McTominay lack in terms of their defensive game, but that's why Nemanja Matic is the perfect partner to Paul Pogba and Bruno Fernandes. Putting everything together then, we've shown that Declan Rice is very good in terms of progressing the ball, moving it forward, which will allow Pogba and Fernandes to be higher up the pitch to dominate the game and create chances for Manchester United. We've shown that defensively, Declan Rice is able to do what Nemanja Matic does, step into the back line, put out fires and stop the opposition creating chances. He also doesn't get dribbled past too much, which is very important in terms of stopping counter-attacks through the middle of the pitch. Overall, we've seen that Declan Rice is the ideal candidate to replace Nemanja Matic for Manchester United. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do drop a like, subscribe to the channel and share us on Twitter if you can. If you've got any questions or anything you want to see in a future video, at me on Twitter, at StatmanCam or Instagram, or send me a DM.